The walk home felt heavier than the walk to his door. The night air, once crisp and inviting, now pressed against me like a reminder of choices yet to be made. Each step echoed in the empty street, mingling with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. I couldn't shake Thomas from my thoughts, the warmth of his apartment, the subtle electricity of our touches, the way his laughter had lingered in my ears. Back in my apartment, the walls seemed closer, the quiet louder. Shadows of familiar objects stretched across the floor, and the mundane comfort of my space suddenly felt constricting. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone beside me, unread messages from my partner glowing softly. The tension between desire and loyalty gnawed at me. I shouldn't have gone. I shouldn't have stayed so long. And yet, why does it feel so thrilling? Flashbacks came unbidden. Moments with my partner, the laughter we shared, the promises we had made, the trust that should have felt unbreakable, played like silent film reels in my mind. Every image made my chest tighten. But alongside them were fragments of the evening with Thomas, a brush of fingers, a glance that held more than it should, the way the light had kissed his hands. Desire and guilt waged a war inside me, each pulling me in opposite directions. Thomas's presence lingered like a ghost. I imagined him in his apartment, perhaps replaying our conversation, perhaps wondering if I had noticed the subtle signs of connection. The thought made my heart race. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every fiber of my being remembered the thrill, the warmth, the pull toward something forbidden. I realized then that this was more than a simple attraction. It was a test of boundaries, a collision between responsibility and temptation. Faceless visuals captured this inner turmoil, hands gripping the edge of the bed, shadows stretching across walls, reflections of streetlights in the window, trembling fingers hovering over a phone. The tension didn't need a face, it was in the body, the gestures, the unspoken thoughts. A shot of my eyes in the dark, catching the reflection of the city outside, conveyed hesitation and longing without revealing my full expression. The moral dilemma reached its peak when I considered what might happen if I returned. Would I cross a line I could never undo? Or would stepping back now preserve the integrity of my life, even as desire whispered in my ear? The uncertainty felt suffocating, a storm of emotion trapped behind the walls of my apartment. I realized the night had changed something in me. The pull of Thomas's world, the allure of his presence, and the magnetic tension of our connection had stirred emotions I couldn't simply ignore. And yet, the weight of choice pressed heavily on me. Do I succumb to temptation, or do I walk away, leaving curiosity and desire behind? As the clock ticked forward, the decision loomed, unresolved. The night held its breath, waiting for me to act or to retreat, and the moral battlefield inside me stretched on, a quiet, invisible war between right and wrong. This part 3 builds inner conflict and suspense, perfect for faceless storytelling with shadows, reflections, and subtle gestures. I can now move on to part 4, the resolution or cliffhanger, where the story reaches its emotional climax and suspenseful ending. Do you want me to write part 4 next? The street was unusually quiet that night. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine from nearby gardens, and the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows across the pavement. My footsteps echoed lightly as I made my way back from the grocery store, my thoughts a jumble of work, deadlines, and the lingering hum of the day. It was then that my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out lazily, expecting a message from a colleague or a notification I could ignore. But the name flashing on the screen made my heart skip, a message from my African neighbor, Thomas. We'd exchanged greetings and occasional small talk before, nothing beyond casual friendliness. But the message read simply, "Hey, I'm home tonight. Want to come over for a drink?" I paused, staring at the screen. My first instinct was to decline. It was late. I had responsibilities, a life outside of fleeting curiosity. Yet something about the message made me hesitate. Thomas had always carried a quiet charisma, the kind that seemed to linger in the air long after he left a room. And now, the thought of stepping into his world at this hour stirred a mixture of excitement and unease inside me. I found myself pacing in my small apartment, the phone still warm in my hand. What would I even say? It's late. I shouldn't. But why do I feel like I want to? My mind flickered between caution and temptation, a tug-of-war I couldn't easily resolve. The mundane comforts of home suddenly felt restrictive, almost stifling, compared to the mystery of what awaited me next door. I imagined the soft glow of his living room light spilling onto the quiet street, the gentle rhythm of music drifting through an open window. My pulse quickened. What would it be like to step over the threshold into someone else's world, to feel their presence so close, to hear laughter in a room that was not my own? And yet, beneath the thrill, there was a whisper of guilt, a cautionary voice reminding me of boundaries I shouldn't cross. Still, curiosity won. My fingers typed a short reply, hesitant but decisive, "File come over." I slipped my phone back into my pocket, feeling the slight tremor of anticipation in my chest. I grabbed my jacket, each movement deliberate, as if preparing for something I didn't fully understand. The walk to Thomas's door felt surreal. Shadows stretched across the pavement, a distant car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the path ahead. My hand hovered over the doorknob, the metal cool under my touch. I took a deep breath, letting the night stillness seep into me, and turned the knob. The door opened to a warm, softly lit interior, inviting me in, and just like that, I crossed the line between the ordinary and the unknown, stepping into a space where curiosity, desire, and temptation waited, unseen but palpable. This part 1 builds tension, sets the scene, and establishes the infidelity theme without showing faces, perfect for faceless video storytelling using shadows, hands, objects, and narration. If you want, I can move on to part 2, the temptation and connection, keeping the same style and pacing. Do you want me to continue? The night felt impossibly still. I stood at the edge of my decision, the weight of it pressing down like the shadows stretching across my walls. Every instinct inside me screamed in different directions, desire, guilt, curiosity, caution, all tangled into an impossible knot. My heart thumped in my chest as I reached for my coat, my phone vibrating lightly on the table. I paused, fingers hovering over the doorknob. The thought of returning to Thomas's apartment made my chest tighten with anticipation, but the echo of my own conscience whispered warnings I could not ignore. I imagined stepping over the threshold again, surrendering to temptation, letting curiosity override reason. Yet just as vividly, I pictured myself leaving, closing the door behind me, and carrying the weight of what I had almost done. Finally, I made my choice. I turned away from the door, my footsteps soft but determined as I walked to the window and looked out over the dimly lit street. Across the way, Thomas's apartment glowed warmly, a siren call I was resisting. The tension between us didn't dissipate with distance, it lingered, a silent thread connecting us across the night. Faceless visuals captured every nuance of this decision. Shadows stretched long across the room, hands brushed briefly against surfaces, reflections shimmered in the glass, and the faint glow of city lights illuminated trembling fingers. A cup of half-finished wine stood on the table, untouched, a symbol of suspended desire. Even without faces, the story spoke volumes, the pull, the hesitation, the unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. But then, just as I allowed myself a small measure of relief, a soft sound reached my ears, a door creaking open, a laugh carried faintly by the night, the unmistakable echo of Thomas's presence outside my window. My heart skipped. Was he coming toward me? Or was it merely a trick of the night, a reminder that temptation was never truly gone? I leaned closer to the window, eyes fixed on the glow of his apartment, and felt the invisible thread tighten again. A shiver ran down my spine, a mixture of fear, longing, and anticipation. The moral choice had been made, or so I thought, but desire had a way of lingering, refusing to be silenced. The night ended without resolution. I did not return, yet I did not completely leave. The tension hung between us, unspoken, unresolved. Questions lingered. Would curiosity draw me back? Would temptation win next time? Or would I finally step away, leaving desire and guilt behind in the shadows of the night? The city outside whispered its secrets. Streetlights flickered. Shadows danced across empty streets. And inside my apartment, the silence spoke louder than words. My African neighbor, Thomas, remained a presence both distant and immediate, a mystery unresolved, a temptation unbroken, a story waiting for the next step. And with that, the night held its breath, leaving me, and the audience, in the delicate, thrilling tension between right and wrong, desire and restraint. This part 4 provides a suspenseful, faceless ending that leaves viewers engaged and curious, perfect for a short faceless video. The story ends on a cliffhanger, emphasizing the internal conflict and temptation without revealing faces, using shadows, gestures, and reflections. If you want, I can now combine all 4 parts into a single 2,000-word story formatted for faceless video narration, ready to use for your script. Do you want me to do that? The moment I stepped inside, the warmth of Thomas's apartment enveloped me, a stark contrast to the crisp night outside. Soft, amber light spilled from a standing lamp, casting long, playful shadows across the walls. The faint rhythm of music floated through the room, slow, jazzy, almost hypnotic. I realized I hadn't noticed how inviting his space could feel, how every object seemed carefully placed to create an atmosphere both comforting and slightly intoxicating. Thomas moved toward the kitchen, his silhouette graceful and unhurried. He poured 2 glasses of wine, the liquid catching the light as he handed one to me. Our fingers brushed briefly, and a tiny spark traveled up my arm. It was such a small thing, yet in the quiet of the night, it felt amplified. I tried to focus on the wine, on the glass in my hand, but the electricity of that touch lingered longer than it should. We settled into the living room, a comfortable distance apart on the sofa. I noticed the way he laughed at his own stories, the way his hands moved when he spoke, even the subtle tilt of his head as he listened. Each detail drew me in, igniting a mixture of fascination and forbidden curiosity. I couldn't stop myself from noticing him, not just as a neighbor, but as someone I could imagine knowing more intimately. Our conversation drifted effortlessly. He asked about my day, my thoughts, my small frustrations, and I found myself sharing more than I normally would. There was a certain safety in the anonymity of the night, in the quiet intimacy of a space where no one else existed. Yet beneath the laughter and the shared stories, a tension hummed, unspoken but palpable. I felt it in the way his eyes lingered when I spoke, in the subtle shift closer when we reached for our glasses at the same time. My mind knew I shouldn't let myself be drawn in, that I was stepping into dangerous territory. But my heart betrayed me, each beat echoing the pull toward something thrilling and forbidden. Faceless visuals captured the tension perfectly. Shadows danced across the walls, hands hovered near each other, and reflections shimmered in the wine glasses. A close-up of his hand brushing against mine, a slight lean toward each other on the sofa, or a flicker of candlelight on the table conveyed intimacy without showing faces. The room seemed to shrink around us, amplifying the connection, amplifying the temptation. I caught myself thinking, I know this is wrong, and yet it feels so right. The moral conflict churned inside me, but the warmth, the laughter, the subtle touches, the very presence of Thomas, kept pulling me closer. Every glance, every gesture, every pause in conversation built an invisible thread between us, a thread I wasn't ready to sever. By the end of the night, the air felt heavier with unspoken possibilities. The tension had thickened, charged with desire and curiosity. I left his gaze lingering in my mind as I realized the night had only just begun to unravel the lines between friendship, temptation, and something far more dangerous. This part 2 intensifies the romantic and infidelity tension while keeping the story faceless, focusing on shadows, gestures, reflections, and inner monologue. I can now continue with part 3, the moral dilemma, where the inner conflict deepens and suspense grows. Do you want me to write part 3 next?